It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. Glad to have you on board. Thanks very much for joining with us. If you're joining us live on our website, great to have you on board. Thank you very much. If you're listening to us on Patriot FB on an audio stream, that's outstanding, and I'm glad to have you on board. I missed yesterday, and I apologize, but I got about 5 inches of ice, and so, frankly, it just wasn't in the cards for me to get here. So my apology to those of you that catch the show every day, but you had to hear a repeat yesterday. So this morning we're going to kind of tackle on a couple of different issues, especially in light of what's going on over in the Ukraine. And we want to cover some of that stuff and kind of bring you up to speed, or at least have you take an inside look at it. Our first topic, because it's the shortest duration of the 4 segments in the morning, is Common Core and the common traits of statists and how they're using Common Core to advance their agenda. You know, we constantly are bombarded by these concepts and principles which really are totally against the concept of common sense in our nation. And we see the names that these folks provide and produce for all of their agendas. And Common Core is no different. You know, you'll see a lot of states are actually trying to declare that Common Core is a state-led initiative and so forth and so on. We're going to talk a little bit about that and how politicians use the names of their legislation, quite frankly, to send a message that is intended to mislead and fool you. And so there was a great article out there this morning on the Daily Caller about it. And I'm also going to take the time here to throw Mike Huckabee under the bus on this Common Core thing. You know, a lot of people stand here and believe that Huckabee is the conservative voice in America on the religious right. I got to tell you, what he's doing in supporting Common Core is a tragedy, and he should be held accountable for that. Okay, our second topic is going to be the discussion in relation to Putin, Obama, the Ukraine, and how all of this conspires to become, for the most part, at least our initial reactions to it at this stage are that this is going to be an epic failure for the United States of America, for a lot of reasons. One, we're being outmaneuvered, outfoxed, and outplayed. Two, we have left Putin in the position of having all the cards in his hand. Three, we have China and Russia conspiring together and independently, so collectively and unilaterally, to damage or injure the United States even further than our own president already has. And then our third topic is going to be a critical thinking exercise on the Ukrainian issue. And I'll tell you why I say that. There was an extraordinarily thought-provoking article that was out in CNS News. And, you know, one of the things that I try to do here is to give you guys an opportunity to exercise critical thinking outside the normal confines of what your opinions and your ideas and your beliefs are. And this particular article was interesting because a Ukrainian envoy in the UN had come out and basically said to the United Nations Security Council in a meeting, let me throw this out to you this way. Suppose, for argument's sake, that at some point in time, the President of the United States left the White House and went somewhere, and while he was gone, Mitt Romney went to the White House, and he and Congress conspired to impeach him and, for all intents and purposes, take over the nation. His question was, would that be a democratically legal move? And the reason I'm throwing this out there is not because that's realistic, but because what is realistic is that at some point in the relatively near future, we as a nation are going to have to make a determination and decision on how we are going to act to preserve and restore our nation back to some semblance of legitimacy. And it's time that we put our thought process to that, to one, ensure that we're not acting in an unconstitutional fashion ourselves, because that would be destructive of our aims and our goals. But secondarily, to look at it and look at it from a step back and say, how would this be viewed by the world, by the supporters of Obama, by the supporters of the Patriot movement, by the supporters of those, and by the independents in the country who really, for the most part, are walking around not quite sure of exactly what's happening, but knowing that they've got this foreboding feeling in the back of their head that something's desperately wrong. It's time that we actually put together some constructive processes and looked at the options that are available to us and how those are going to be viewed. Because at some point in time in the near future, there is no parallel for where we are today, and we're going to have to determine how we're going to take action. And we have to make sure, one, that it is constitutional, not only from a legal perspective, because we don't want to rely upon technicalities, but that it is legal from a constitutionally principled perspective. That's an important aspect, and we cannot overlook that or allow our desire to restore the nation turn us into exactly that which we abhor. Our fourth topic is going to be how the Ukraine might actually save the United States of America. And again, this is another exercise in critical thinking. I want you to think outside of the parameters of how you normally view things. And instead of being reactionary, I want you to think a little bit outside the box of how would I view this in a different light? What can the benefits be of the Ukrainian situation, and how will that ultimately possibly benefit the United States of America? So, without further ado, let's get on to our first topic, which is this Common Core topic. The article out this morning in Daily Caller, Common Core proponents try to save the flailing standards using this one weird trick. Now, that's a play off on that stupid ad you see out there all the time, Missourians or Alabamans or Nevadans or whatever state you're in, save X dollars on their insurance using this one weird trick, or lose weight using this one weird trick. So it's not a commercial, it's actually an article, and he was just playing on the words. The concept here is that this trick that's used is, and he compares it, and the author compares it, his name is Eric Owens, he's the education editor for Daily Caller. He compares this to the movie called Coming to America, which was an Eddie Murphy movie back in the late 80s. And basically what he's suggesting here is that Murphy worked at this fast food restaurant, which, paralleled exactly what McDonald's did, but they called it McDowell's. And the logos were similar. In other words, McDonald's had the golden arches, but McDowell had the golden arcs. McDonald's had a Big Mac, but McDowell's had a Big Mick. And, basically, the argument is that this was an exact duplicate or a replication of what McDonald's was doing, but with enough name changes that they could get away with it legally. The comparison is to what states are now doing to force the implementation of Common Core, which we know to be a destructive mechanism for indoctrination of our children. And anyone who would deny that at this point can be put in the category of those who would be either for it because they have some vested interest in it, or because they have not done their homework and taken an objective look at what Common Core is designed and geared upon. By the way, if you're a parent and you have not looked seriously at Common Core and you're not familiar with it and what it does and what it means and how it's going to affect your children, I'm going to submit to you right now that you have completely abdicated your responsibility as a parent to your children, and you should be ashamed of yourself. If you're a parent and you just took offense at that, tough luck. How's that? The simple truth is this. You as a parent have one obligation, and that is the protection of your children. And that doesn't include just their physical protection, doesn't include just keeping them warm and well fed. It includes their mind, which is quite frankly far more important than all the rest of those things. And if you have abdicated your responsibility to your child, I have nothing further to talk to you about. But in this instance, what's happening is the states are attempting to change the names. And what they're looking to do is to try to change the name so that you cannot, or as a parent, can't associate it with Common Core. As an example, in Florida, they've changed, they're rebranding Common Core as, quote, Next Generation Sunshine State Standards. Say that 5 times fast. Next Generation Sunshine State Standards. I'm not going to even try. In Iowa, they're changing the name and trying to rebrand and relabel this as the Iowa Core. In Arizona, they have superficially changed it to Arizona College and Career Ready Standards. So here's my point. What I want you to do is recognize that the vast majority of names that statists give to legislative initiatives, any kind of Common Core as a specific example, which is not a legislative initiative, but it is a federal takeover of the school systems. They rename these things because we as Americans, for the most part, live on the 10-second soundbite. That's what you hear on the news. That's what you hear on the radio. When those bits of news that you do hear, you normally don't get a full grounding and a full understanding of what they are. That's why I've had people say to me, well, why do you have this 30-minute or 25-minute segment that you do on each topic? You only break the show into 4 segments. Other hosts, will take a 2-hour show and they'll cover 10 segments. Well, the truth is, I try to choose those segments that I think are representative of the topics that are important to America. And then I don't want to just give you that 30-second soundbite or the elevator version. I want you to be thoroughly understanding of the issues surrounding it. And yes, I bloviate a lot. Everybody does. I mean, that's this business, right? If you're sitting behind a microphone, your job is to talk. And yes, a lot of it is my opinion coupled with how I view the information that's out there. But I try to make sure that you have an understanding of a different perspective than you're being given by the mainstream Ministry of Propaganda. That's the goal. The principle, the premise is, don't accept what you're being told from the Ministry of Propaganda, whether that be the news media on video, whether that be audio, whether that be written in a newspaper, whether it be something you're hearing on radio. Because the one thing that apparently is completely underrepresented in America is the patriot concept of let's just go back to what worked and what we knew was good for our country. Nobody wants to talk about that. Even those guys who are the big names, Mark Levin and Rush Limbaugh and those guys, to a certain extent, and I'm not trying to trash anybody here, I'm giving you my opinion or my perspective of it. Those guys bring out a lot of these issues, and they have a lot to say about them. I guess my concern with it is that they're not going far enough. They don't, represent what I think a significant percentage of America is really feeling about this. And whether that's because they can't and still retain their lead dog position in the industry, or whether that is because they've been pressured, I don't know. Maybe they just don't see it quite as starkly as I do, and hopefully you. Maybe they don't, and if that's the case, and they've got a bigger worldview than I do, and I'm myopic in my understanding of issues. Okay, and perhaps that is the case. They're far more successful than I. I mean, I've got a relatively pipsqueak audience in comparison to what you get from a Rush Limbaugh or a Levin or a Glenn Beck. I mean, well, be that as it may, the simple truth is the game of renaming, the game of labeling, has become a method of tripping America up And I think the media is guilty of it, and that includes conservative news talk radio. That includes conservative news on Fox, which is really the only, even close to conservative. But I look at Fox, and in many cases I say they're controlled opposition. And I'll tell you why. I don't see them coming out here and exposing these Common Core issues the way I believe they should. And I got to assume that's from the top down. There's no other way. There's no other logical explanation for why Fox would fail to expose Common Core for what it really is. I mean, I hear it occasionally blurbed across, but it's a soundbite. I hear, some of the hosts take it on once in a while, but they give it no more than a couple of minutes of token, kind of passing. They hit it in passing, but they never actually stand and fight it. They kind of walk by and slap it, but they never actually stop and say, here's a 1-2 punch and a follow-up. And I'm disturbed about it because America as a nation has a limited time to stop this process in Common Core before it completely invades our educational system. And this is Common Core is the equivalent of a parasitic entity that once it gets inside will be almost impossible to dislodge, not without killing the patient to accomplish the task. And we already have enough problems with our education system. Adding to that by turning around and injecting an even worse system than we already have now is counterproductive. The truth is, Americans don't get a full understanding of Common Core because, for whatever reason, the Ministry of Propaganda is acquiescing to it. They're either agreeing to it, or they've been coerced or co-opted or pressured to not discuss it and not expose it for what it really is. I've gone to many Common Core meetings, and I've heard some real, true, earnest people speak in reference to Common Core and expose a lot of the characterizations that make it up. Anyone who looks at it objectively cannot possibly walk away from the evidence and the facts, the empirical documentation, and say Common Core is good for this country. You have New York, perhaps New York City, perhaps the height of culture and income and finance in the world. And yet 80% of the children who graduate there have to go back in and take rudimentary, elementary reading classes in order just to get into state university. We're not talking about a higher college here. We're not talking about Ivy League. We're just talking about the basic community college, state university of New York. They have to go and take remedial classes on math, reading, language, literature, just to get into college. 80%, folks. And when you have a staggering cost associated with the educational system in New York, and you look at the fact that they were one of the forerunners of implementing Common Core, you have to draw the correlation. The NEA, National Education Association, just came out the other day and has rejected Common Core, saying that they've bungled this thing so badly, it's unsalvageable. Mike Huckabee, he went in and he spoke at the Council of Chief State School Officers. And he and Jeb Bush, by the way, are both open and adamant supporters of Common Core. And so I encourage you to make sure that if either of those men throw their hat into the ring for a 2016 election, that they are resoundingly defeated. Because if Mike Huckabee would stand for Common Core after having looked at the information that's available on it, I can no longer trust the man's judgment, much less his motivations. Jeb Bush, I wouldn't trust Jeb Bush to, put my campfire out with a 25-gallon bucket of water. Huckabee went into this Council of Chief State School Officers, and he admitted that the Common Core brand name has become, quote, toxic. And so he is urging education bureaucrats and these people who run these state school boards to change it. Here's what he said. Rebrand it, refocus it, but don't retreat. Mike Huckabee has made a statement there by reinforcing and doubling down on his position that Common Core is a good thing for these school systems, that calls into question his integrity, his judgment, and his honor. Governor Haley from South Carolina, Nikki Haley, she completely disagrees. And her comment, I think, was very telling. She said, we don't ever want to educate South Carolina children like they educate California children. We want to educate South Carolina children on South Carolina standards, not anyone else's standards. There are now 46 states and D.C. that have begun implementing either all or parts of Common Core. They're changing the name to try to fool you into believing it's something that it's not. Beware, be wise, and make sure that in your state you are doing anything and everything, even if you don't have children, to fight back against the criminality of Common Core. It is intended to manipulate and turn your child's mind from that of independence, self-reliance, free thought, critical thinking, to an automaton. Make no mistake about it. Common Core is bad for your children, and it's bad for America. We're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to tackle this Putin, Obama, Ukraine, and the epic failure for the United States. I want to look at it from a number of different perspectives because this is a critical issue. It has the potential to turn into something much larger and much more toxic than it currently is. And it has the ability to drag the United States into a confrontation with Russia and China that can be devastating for us as a nation. We're going to take a quick break. When I return, we'll tackle that. I would like for you, in the meantime, to get yourself a cup of coffee. We'll be back in just a second. You're listening to America's Voice Now. If you would like to support our sponsors, I would be grateful, and so would they. These are the folks that keep us on the air in the morning. You can contact the folks over at Express Mini Marts 1 and 2, both located in the heart of West Plains, one right on the outskirts of the city, on 14 and 63 at the intersection there in what's used to be Granny's old Granny's Cafe. Both of these locations have a drive-through, and so you don't even have to get out of your car when the weather is awful like this. Please make sure that you stop in there and see those folks and tell them, hey, I heard about you on the radio on America's Voice Now. The second location is right across the street from the city pool on Porter Wagoner Boulevard in West Plains, right there at that four-corner intersection. And make sure that you swing in there as well. Our friends over at Battery Station at batterystation.com. You can reach them at 417-257-7799 or see them at batterystation.com. Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, where Tuesdays and Thursdays are reduced lunch days, and Tuesday night, kids under 12 eat free on family night. Our friends over at the law offices of Jason Henry, 417-256-4100. And he's an outstanding attorney. If you have an opportunity to utilize his services, please do so. We'll be back in just a second. Good morning, America. You're joining us in our second segment of 4 this morning. You know, we wanted to take a look at what's happening over there in the Ukraine. And, you know, certainly I am I would not consider myself an international expert. The people who are dealing with this have access to enormous amounts of information that I would never be privy to. But there are certain things that, irrespective of our view of the information surrounding it that we can draw as fairly common sense issues. And as facts unveil themselves, we can make determinations about our role, our position, the outcome, the good, the bad, the ugly. What we have seen, and the evidence supports the conclusions, that we have a worldview that has diminished dramatically over the course of the last, during the Obama reign, precipitously. During the Bush reign, dramatically. And when I say that, I'm talking about a projection of strength, not a question of whether or not they like our foreign policy. Our foreign policy nobody likes. We don't even like it. So why should they? And we don't practice what we preach. You know, we constantly are running around saying, well, you have to have democracy. Well, sorry, but we're not a democracy. We're a republic. And the difference between a democracy and a republic should not be lost on anyone. If you are one of those people that does not understand the difference between a democracy and a republic, or a republican democracy, then I encourage you to utilize the information resources that are available to you to educate yourself about that, because it is stark and it is significant. The worldview of us, in terms of the strength and the resilience, and whether or not we are resolute in the face of the courage of our convictions, has dramatically slipped. And it's not just a question of President Obama. This was before him. I mean, you know, Bush was not much better, but at least those countries that were enemies of ours looked upon Bush and recognized that, you know, if he made a position statement, he was they could be pretty confident he would stick by that statement. In this case, because we have seen Obama, you know, make so many faux pas and present such a milquetoast weak hand on an international level, that I'm not surprised, frankly, that it. In fact, I guess I'd be surprised if this had not come around sooner, or that it's taken this long. And when I say that, well, the other day I heard Angela Merkel say that Putin was not dealing with reality, and I heard that comment echoed by President Obama. And I got to tell you something. I beg to differ. I believe that it's Obama and Merkel who are not living in reality. They're living in some sort of a fantasy where just talk and reasonable expectations of capitulation of your opponent will always be the result, based upon pressure and force that is not necessarily related or congruent with their best interests. The truth of the matter is, the reality is, he's already in the Ukraine. That he carries the cards, that he has a vested interest in keeping the Ukraine close to the nation of Russia, for the simple reason that 80% of all the natural gas and the oil that Russia exports, which is the only thing it has going for it economically as a nation, goes directly through the Ukraine. And I wish I had the capability and the wherewithal to show you a Ukrainian map of these pipelines. But what I can tell you is that it looks like spaghetti. And all of them exit straight out of Russia and straight through the Ukraine, and then into Poland and the neighboring Romania and the neighboring countries. And all of that is then sold on the markets in Europe. 80% of Russia's export for energy comes through the Ukraine. Let me tell you something. That is reality. And feeling that, or voicing the opinion that Putin is not operating in reality is disingenuous and dishonest. One, to themselves, and I'm talking about Merkel here and Obama, and two, to the nations which they lead. Because there is no way that Putin is going to back off from this position, and the truth of the matter is, he's already won. We will never, at least not without an enormous amount of bloodshed, see Putin dislodged from Ukraine. Whether he remains just in Crimea or whether or not he takes the whole eastern portion of the Ukraine. We watched him do this in Georgia. That was also completely ignored. And they said at that time, you know, Mr. Putin, you're on the wrong side of history. You're not dealing in reality. Well, with all due respect, he still owns half of Georgia. It's never been returned to the Georgians. It was a sovereign nation before, and he invaded it as a sovereign nation and took what he wanted. I'm reminded when I hear Merkel and Obama talk like this of the mistake that we saw, and every history book will look back upon and say, even the rewritten history books, looks back on the mistakes that Chamberlain made in World War II as they conceded nation after nation after nation, action after action after action to the Nazis. Over and over and over, they said, well, he promises this is the last one he's going to take. and then a couple of months later, he took another country. Well, he says this is the last one, so we're going to take him for his word. In the meantime, these statists have absolutely no concern or respect for the people who are living underneath these tyrannical moves, whether they're Putins or whether they were the Nazis. He's already deployed into Crimea. He's not going to be dislodged. Not anytime soon, and not without an enormous amount of bloodshed. For Obama to say he's on the wrong side of history may be a nice soundbite, but it has absolutely zero value. And the truth is, this shows another epic failure of not only Obama, but the United States foreign policy as a general rule. You know, back in 2008, when he invaded Georgia, right after that, Obama became president, right? I mean, the election was in 2008, but he didn't actually take office until 2009. And Hillary Clinton, immediately tried to step in under the Secretary of State mantle, and Obama tried to essentially push that off and say, well, it wasn't really under my administration, it was under Bush. But no matter how you look at it, he still has half of Georgia. And these were independent sovereign nations or independent countries. They allowed Russia to keep that. And when they came in, if ever there was a time for a strong arm to say, stop right there, you're going to return that back to Georgia, or you're going to have to deal with the United States as a nation protecting the sovereignty of the little guy. The minute that he sensed that they were unwilling to do that, and they weren't, Hillary ran over there and immediately, first of all, Obama went on his apology tour, if you recall, and Hillary immediately ran over there and licked the boots of their Russian foreign minister. In fact, Hillary made a big deal out of the let's reset our relationship argument. So she set a tone at apparently the direction of Obama that it was okay what he had done, and we were going to let bygones be bygones. With a guy like Putin, that's a serious mistake. The second mistake they made was showing Medvedev, who was at the time the president, right? If you remember the course of events, Putin was the president, then he stepped down, and his hand-picked successor, Medvedev, came in. And then after that, Putin became president again. And during that conversation where Obama stated in a hot open mic, specifically he was talking about missile defense and removing the missile defense shield that we'd had in Poland and other European countries, that I understand this is my last election. After this next election, I'll have more flexibility, and don't worry about it. We're going to take care of this. Transmit this off to Vladimir Putin. Medvedev looked at Obama at that moment and said, "This guy is such an easy target. We can hit him with our eyes closed. We can hit him with our eyes closed." Then Obama made the fatal statement or fatal mistake of trashing Romney during the 2012 election in reference to his views on Russia, in which he very clearly stated that Russia was an enemy to be watched and contended with and not to be taken lightly. And Obama actually was mocking of that, saying, hey, the 80s want their foreign policy back. In other words, hey, your village called, they want their idiot back. Well, the truth of the matter is, Obama may think everybody else operates like him, but they don't. And the world is a dangerous place. And there are people out there that will stop at nothing, including the murder of millions of innocents, to accomplish their drive for power. And Obama, while he is in that group himself, towards our own nation, fails to see it in others. The truth is that we have constantly signaled to Putin, and China, by the way, that we are weak, indecisive, that we have no real interest in pursuing and protecting all that which we have spent all this time, money, treasure, energy, the lives of our service people to build in the first place. And it reminds me of the problems we had during the Vietnam War, where we would go in there and we would charge up Hamburger Hill, called Hamburger Hill because of the total slaughter that associated with our troops, to get to the top, to plant the flag in there, and literally in 24 hours to turn around and march off the hill and give it right back to the enemy. I mean, what was the point? Except now this is our entire foreign policy. Obama's also made the mistake of exposing himself in Syria. This argument that if you cross that line, if you cross this line, it's going to get ugly. And the bully steps right over the line boldly and says, now what are you going to do about it? And Obama backs up again and draws another line in the ground with the stick and says, well, if you cross this one, it's going to be real consequences. And Putin boldly steps over the line and says, yeah, now what are you going to do? The truth is, he knows that Obama is either afraid or a darn fool. He knows he's weak. And that's a serious mistake to make in the face of a guy who has global intentions and the physical means to accomplish that. No one at this point should overlook Putin's origins or his intentions. He comes from the KGB. He is a ruthless man who would, assuming for argument's sake he thought he could get away with it without a camera or some other thing else, he'd be happy, and I have no doubt at all that Putin is a man who has taken other men's lives. He has no problem, and we've seen it from his own examples, causing collateral damage, waging war on his own citizens. I mean, why would you doubt him at this point? If any man who is capable of waging war on his own citizenry to achieve some political end is certainly guilty or capable of waging war on non-entities who he considers to be collateral damage. Iran was another major faux pas. You know, Russia and Iran are allied, if you will. And it's funny that the lineup of allies of Russia are all of the enemies of the United States, spoken of or otherwise. And the idea of what's been going on here with this nuclear ambitions of Iran, and I don't care whether you stand on these issues or not, I'm just drawing the comparison here between Putin and how we have misjudged him. Out of incompetence, ineptitude, and impotence. And I don't say we as a nation, but I am talking about our leadership. And by the way, this is not limited only to Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Hillary because she was the Secretary of State, Barack because he is the President of the United States. But this is also directly tied to every member of Congress. They are the leadership that should be, for all intents and purposes, evaluating the risks and coming up with strategies that position us in a favorable light. And they have completely and utterly failed. Iran is such a joke. They sound like a bunch of bickering kindergartners. They can't figure out a strategy. And it's embarrassing, to be perfectly blunt. I'm embarrassed that Washington is as inept, corrupt, foolish, childish, and backbiting and backstabbing and you know, from the world's perspective, they look at these people and they say, these people are liars and thieves and cutthroats. What have we to fear from them? And finally, the issue of the gutting of their own nation. When I say they, I mean Washington. Don't think for a moment that Putin is not sitting there watching the actions of our legislature, our presidency, sitting there and stripping Americans of that which has always separated us from the rest of the world. Never make the mistake of thinking that he is not sitting there, and not just him. This is China, this is Venezuela, this is Iran, this is Karzai in Afghanistan, this is Iraq. And looking at us and saying, you know, you're all such a bunch of phony hypocrites. You pitch this, you sell that, you don't practice it yourselves, and then you turn around and you steal from your own people that exact right which you proclaim that we have failed to deliver to ours. How dare you? The truth is that Putin sees in Obama this egomaniacal desire for power, even when it comes at the expense of his own people and his own nation. And he knows that feeling, and he knows that desire, and he knows that power, because he has it also. And while our Congress and our leadership in the executive are corrupt authoritarians who are, for all intents and purposes, utilizing whatever tactics are at their disposal, and I'm talking about both parties here, not Democrats, not Republicans, both, to rob our nation of every vestige of all of the resources that we have, that, and I'm talking here about natural resources. I'm talking about the resources of our labor, of the resources of our savings, and quite honestly, the intangible resources of our trust, and the resources of our courage of our convictions and our foundational principles. Those may not be tangible assets you can take, but you can beat them into submission, to destroy the soul and the heart and the honor and the integrity and the self-reliance and independence of this nation for personal, political gain, financial gain. Putin looks at us and he's laughing. He knows wisely exactly what they are, and they're all a bunch of wannabes. I don't like Putin, but I can tell you this. Irrespective of the fact that I think he's a tyrant and a thug, at least he doesn't try to proclaim himself to be something he's not. He makes no bones about the fact that he's an aggressive, argumentative, mean-spirited egomaniac. I mean, in polite society, he may, contain himself a little bit, but anybody who looks at him in an honest and objective light, there's no doubt about who he is and what he's capable of and what his intentions are. The truth is that Putin looks at our guys and says, I have no respect for them because they're everything they call me and then some. They just have a lot less experience at it. That's a shame. Because it's a legacy that long after Obama and Hillary Clinton and the likes of John Boehner and Lindsey Graham and the likes of John McCain and the likes of Pelosi and Schumer and Reid, long after they're gone, our nation will reel from the damage they've done. It's shameful because we are going to be left with the legacy of their tyranny, their abuse, their corruption, their coercion, and their unbridled desire for personal power. It's unfortunate that 315 million people are going to pay for the benefit of a few thousand. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to throw out a critical thinking exercise on this Ukrainian issue, and I want you to evaluate it from a different light, a different perspective. I want you to step away from the position you normally occupy and walk 45 degrees to the side and look at it again, objectively. We're going to throw an idea and a scenario out there that'll help you to evaluate it a little bit. I think it's a good exercise because it helps you to challenge your own thinking, your own beliefs, and your own opinions, and question them, while at the same point in time arriving at conclusions that ultimately will encourage you to see things in a new light on an ongoing, consistent basis. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. If you have an opportunity, please make sure that you visit our friends over at Wits End Classic Barbershop. They're located on the square in West Plains, and you can reach my buddy Jason over there and get yourself a great haircut for $10. He also does a hot lather straight shave with the hot towel, the straight razor, the whole 9 yards. Right? It's a great treat, and if you've got a husband or a boyfriend or a father or somebody significant in your life that you think would enjoy that, I would encourage you to go down there, bring them down there one afternoon, and send them in for a treat. After they're done, they can swing into the back at the Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop. You can get them a nice cigar, and it's a wonderful thing for a Father's Day, a birthday present, something along those lines. You can also, in Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop, if you're getting married or you're looking for a place to hold a small get-together, they have an outstanding facility there where you've got large-screen TVs, and you can hold a party there, a bachelor party perhaps, a bachelorette party even, and so forth and so on. If you're having a child, they've got all the It's a Boy, It's a Girl cigars that you can use. You can reach them at 417-257-1776. And I would ask that you support those guys. If you get a chance to, swing by and see our friends over at Battery Station, batterystation.com, 417-257-7799. We'll be back in just a moment.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. If you're just joining us, appreciate your attendance this morning. We have been reviewing some information and issues. We're in the third of four segments this morning, and we've been looking at some issues surrounding Common Core and some of the current news that's out there in reference to the Ukraine and the standoff that's happening there, and our role in it and how all of that plays together. There is an article out there on CNS News this morning, and if you don't use CNS News on a routine basis, I would encourage you to do that. CNS as in Charlie November Sierra, cnsnews.com. They are an alternative media solution that gives you something other than the Ministry of Propaganda is feeding you on a routine basis, and I really like their site. They have some neat insight, and I just, I don't believe anything from any media outlet completely, but I do constantly seek to find alternative sources, and CNS News is one of them. One of the Russian envoys to the UN cast out a scenario the other day that I thought was interesting because it caused me to think and to take a position that ordinarily would, your immediate off-the-hip response doesn't generate. He came into the UN on Monday, and the comparison that he drew when he was, of course, being challenged by everyone, including the pathetic and shameful Samantha Powers. She's been talking tough here in the UN, but I have no respect for Samantha Powers at all. She is an ideologue. She is a person who has shown herself to be invested in the destruction and the ruination of our nation. And that Samantha Powers is, in my opinion, a very, very dangerous person. One, because of the power she wields, and two, because of the ideology she clings to. But this Russian ambassador threw out a scenario that put a new twist on the question for people's minds. And he compared the situation in the Ukraine and said, well, suppose for argument's sake that President Obama was often vacationing in Hawaii at a cost of about $7.5 million to the American taxpayer. And while he was gone, Mitt Romney shows up at the White House, goes into a joint session of the Congress, and the Congress impeaches the president while he's on vacation in Hawaii. His question was, would that be legal? Would it be constitutional? Would it be democratic? Now, I'm not giving the argument credence because that's not exactly what happened in the Ukraine. First and foremost, this wasn't the president on vacation, Yanukovych, the current president on vacation, or I should say the deposed president on vacation. And the situation didn't happen quite in that scenario. He's certainly simplifying it to try to make his point. But what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at that situation and put some thought to the idea that we also may at some point in the fairly near future have to ask those same questions of ourselves. Excuse me. And when I say that, I mean we have a president and a Congress, frankly, and a judicial system that is clearly operating against the best interests of the nation at heart and as a whole. And the tumult in the Ukraine is not unlike what you could clearly envision happening here in the United States in the event something like the American Spring were to be successful. It starts out as a protest. Government responds negatively and improperly, becomes a revolt, and ends up causing the ouster of a leadership. What I want you to try to walk away from with this, and I encourage you to read the article first and foremost, because it kind of lays the groundwork for you to get a concept of how you can view this. But we really need to take a look at our own motivations and our own drives and determine how are we going to do this where we, one, retain the moral, ethical, and legal high ground. And I put legal last. I'll tell you why. If we do something immoral and unethical or illegal in our attempt to restore and preserve the nation, then we have become no different than the tyrants that are currently in power. Good cannot come from evil action, no matter how you try to rationalize that. And so, trying to make sure that we're aware of the boundaries and the limitations which exist, which are our own personal restraints. When I say that, I mean we have to restrain ourselves from acting improperly when we talk about the restoration and a revolution, if you will, in the United States of America. And I'm not talking about a violent one. I'm just talking about the idea that we can actually regain control of our elected government, remove those in power, replace them with those who will operate within the boundaries of the constitutional framework, and wash out and flush our national government and our state governments of the tyrannical aspects. Now, there's a lot of people who say, come on, man, you're dreaming. That's never going to happen. Well, you may well be right. I don't believe that there is enough critical mass in the United States that is yet cognizant, and I say yet, cognizant, of how far down the road of tyranny we've strolled. But I have no doubt in my mind that at some point in time, some event is going to trigger a reaction and a response from our national government and therefore our state governments that is going to be a very, very rude awakening for the majority of Americans who blindly and dumbly stumble through life, completely unaware of the risks that surround us at every waking moment. At some point, it may come to a stage when we have to say to them, we're not leaving until you do. It's time for you to go. We're sending you home, you're fired, and we're replacing you with those who have promised and sworn an oath to actually provide us with a better guidance, a better leadership than you. Now, does that automatically mean that we will achieve what we want? Not necessarily. I mean, we have to be mindful and cognizant of the fact that just because we want them to be, honest and bear integrity, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where we're going to get. But, and of course, that to a certain extent leads to the argument that I've thrown out before about, having these people commit in writing to a path, a cause of action. See, one of the problems that we have is that there's no one that stands above the crowd and says, and gives others who are stepping into the role an opportunity to view that person and say, there's someone I would emulate. The minute they get into the Congress, the minute they get into the presidency, they're so corrupted, and the pressure is so hard to just play along. But there will come a time when America will be enlightened to what's happening in our country. I don't know what the time and the date is for that. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm no Nostradamus. But it's at some point in time, the vast majority of America is going to awaken to the tragedy that we've allowed to happen. And it's happened before to us, folks. It happened during the Great Depression. You know, the country was awash in easy money and footloose and fancy-free, and suddenly everything changed. And it went on for a long time. The people who exited out the other end of history in the tunnel of the Depression came out changed. And it affected us for generations. Your grandparents who lived through the Depression today are the most conservative Americans that exist. Conservative fiscally, because they recognize that it's all transient. They are conservative in their viewpoints politically, in their approach towards resources. It only took the term of the Depression. Remember, it happened in 1929, and it ran basically until 39. I mean, realistically, it was a 10-year window. What pulled us out of it? Forget the idea that it was, political moves by the Roosevelt administration. That would be a lie to yourself. What pulled us out of it was World War II. And world wars, or just wars in general, are usually used to jumpstart or kickstart an economy. We're not the only ones who have done it, by the way. Look at Hitler. He dragged the nation of Germany from the, almost Zimbabwe-like inflation of the Weimar Republic and the complete collapse of their economy and their fiscal sovereignty to almost to the position of being able to take over vast segments of the planet. I mean, he made major mistakes along the way. Tactical mistakes I'm talking about. Forget the Holocaust and all the rest of that. I'm just talking about his military and the conquest concepts. He was almost successful. There were major, mistakes he made along the way, but none of that takes away the fact that he came pretty doggone close. Nations utilize wars to boost their economy, draw the people together. I mean, this isn't, some kind of a new concept to us. And we have to recognize that at some point in time, this nation is going to go through another, if you want to call it, and I don't want to say it's a Great Depression, but some kind of another cataclysmic event in the historical context that will transform the nation and swing the pendulum back the other way. We're now in the late 1920s. Easy money, a bubble on Wall Street, lack of self-governance, lack of self-reliance, complete and utter, just foolishness. Listen to the people who try to defend the policies of this government. It's impossible to even look at them and have any respect for them as individuals, because you can clearly see they're struggling to even come up with arguments that support it. watched a guy on Fox last night. He was a long-time Democratic strategist is what they called him. And this guy was trying to defend this extension of Obamacare and the completely just ridiculousness of it. And then he was trying to defend Obama's position on the world stage. I mean, the guy was struggling for words, and it wasn't because he wasn't articulate. It wasn't because he didn't know his subject. He's a longtime strategist. He's been pitching this same Kool-Aid for decades. It's just that even to the long-term supporters, the thing is so thin, it's hard to actually make anything out of it. Of course, his bread is buttered there, so he's not going to change his position in the midstream. And at this stage in the game, he's not going to turn around and say, for decades I've been misleading everybody who's been listening to me. The number one flaw in and the number one frailty of humanity. I'll never admit I was wrong, even when I know it. The truth is that it won't be long until we are at a position where we have to make a decision that is going to affect and dramatically alter the nation that we and the political leadership that we have. I can tell you this, and here's what I'm the exercise portion of this. I want you to think, if our situation was as the Ukrainians, what's within the boundaries of legal, moral, and ethical and constitutional behavior for us to move forward? If you take the Russian envoy's argument, and he says, he used the analogy that the president had left the capital for a short term, and while he's gone, Romney comes in, gets together with Congress, they impeach Obama overnight, and boom, he now claims himself to be the new president and sitting in a coup de grace. Well, of course, that's not what really happened. The truth is the Ukrainian president fled. Which is completely different than, going on vacation. There was no mistaking what he did, folks. And there's no mistaking the damage he'd done to his country. When I say that, I'm talking about the theft of tens of billions of dollars from their national treasury. But again, that just draws the correlation closer and closer and closer to our scenario with Obama. Now, I'm not suggesting that President Obama has absconded with billions of dollars of American money. But he has put us into debt with trillions of dollars that is going to be left to us and our progeny to pay off. And that may even be worse. I mean, realistically, think about it. At some point in time, and whether it's during the reign of Obama or the reign of the next traitor who takes the office, and I'll be honest with you, if it's Hillary Clinton, I'm telling you right now, any American that votes for Hillary Clinton is voting for tyranny. And if it's, any of the named, Chris Christie or something, you got to be kidding me. I mean, talk about desperation to save yourself by voting in the devil. Gee whiz. There are no leaders that, in my opinion, I would be willing to put my life on the line for. There's no one in there that I would say, that's my George Washington. No one. Maybe I could get behind a Cruz. Rand Paul, I got some serious doubts. And even Cruz, although he espouses that which I believe publicly, if he's willing to compromise away. I posted an article up on AVN the other day about how the electorate is unhappy about the fact that the GOP keeps constantly trading off our rights, and that there's no support for them. And they continuously mistake it and say, well, we can just take them for granted because they'll always show up at the polls. And let's go after the Hispanic vote. Let's go after come on. The truth of the matter is, if you guys would just stand for what you actually believe in, and you'd stop showing us by your actions that you're liars inherent, we'd support you 100%. And you wouldn't have to go after the X vote. But by doing so, you're just showing us that we were right all along. You're traitors. And you're willing to sacrifice us for power. It's a bad place for us to be. So, in your critical thinking exercise, put yourself and put our nation in the position of the Ukraine. How do we handle it? How do we respond? How do we react? What's right for us to do? And how do we do it legally, ethically, and morally? When we come back, I'm going to throw the second half of this scenario at you, which is taking a look at how the activity that's going on in the Ukraine and the militaristic rise of China might actually be the savior of America. We're going to look at something from the different angle. We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Please make sure that you visit our sponsors. We've got some great folks out there, including the guys over at Express Mini Marts 1 and 2 on 14 and 63 and across the street from the City Pool at People's Park in West Plains. Our friends over at the law offices of Jason Henry, 417-256-4100. Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop on the square in West Plains at 417-257-1776. Wits End Classic Barber Shop at 417-372-2027. If you have an opportunity and you can swing by Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, Tuesdays and Thursdays are reduced lunch days, and on Tuesday evening, that's tonight, kids under 12 eat free because it's family night. Great buffet there with a salad bar and pizza bar, and there's pasta there as well. So enjoy that with your family. Get out there, have a great lunch today or a great dinner tonight. And while you're in Pizza Hut, just go over there to the manager and the server and say, hey, I heard about you guys on AVN, on Mike's program, and I'm glad that you're a supporter of that program. Thank you very much. Last but not least, our friends over at Battery Station, 417-257-7799. You can find them on the web at batterystation.com. And if you have an opportunity to, please take a look at two of our friends over at AtlasSurvivalShelters.com, AtlasSurvivalShelters.com, and my friend Dan over at SurvivalByPreparedness.com, SurvivalByPreparedness.com. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment, and when we hit there, we're going to talk about how the issues in the Ukraine and the rise of militaristic China may yet save America from ourselves. Hang on. America. We are back. Hey, thanks for riding with us this morning. I hope you guys are listening to us on Patriot FB. That's Patriot F like Foxtrot, B like Bravo. Good friends of mine over there, and a great place for you to become a member. The Patriot FB website is very much like Facebook. And the idea is that you can be allied and friends and communicate with others who are of a similar mindset than you. There's no trolls on there. Their security is pretty high, so there's no trolls on there. There is there is a group of people that are firmly in the same belief system that you are. Not that you should completely surround yourself with people like that all the time, because that's the defeatist position against critical thinking. I do believe that you should challenge yourself, as we did in the last segment, and we're going to do in this segment. But there are times when you need to be able to sit down with other folks that have similar viewpoints, understandings, and appreciations of your positions that is critical to you. Now, there's a couple of radio programs that stream live on Patriot FB every morning, and I would encourage you to participate in there. I come on there at 8 o'clock, and I run until about 10. There's a podcast there that you can listen to. It's patriotfb.com/radio. And if you plug that in, it's like a podcast player that will pop up in your browser. You can listen to it all day. It's patriotfb.com/radio. Now, when you go to that link, and by the way, that works even if you're not a member of Patriot FB. But if you go in there and you register and you sign up and all that kind of thing, you'll make a bunch of friends. After I come on, or I go off the air at 10 o'clock, Resurrect the Republic comes on with Tom Lacavara. And that's a great program. Tom is also a radio host over at Republic Broadcasting. And then after his program, there's some music until about 2 in the afternoon, and then J.J. McCartney comes on. And J.J. is he is a great, he's a great patriot guy, and he's got a good, solid religious and moral viewpoint that I think you'll enjoy. After that, from 4 to 9 o'clock is music, and then at 9 o'clock, Midnight Patriot comes on. Midnight Patriot is Jeff Norton's program, and kind of similar to what AVN does. We tackle different topics and subjects, and of course Jeff takes a different position and slant on things. But I think you'll enjoy an opportunity to listen to some great hosts who you don't see or hear on a national broadcast basis. We're the guys that are kind of sitting out there and saying, we're not completely happy with what we hear out of the Rush Limbaughs and the Glenn Becks and the Mark Levins of the world. And I have great respect for all three of those guys. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But I believe that there is room for other, more conservative opinions than we hear espoused there. And, I call it the way I see it. Some people agree with me, some don't. I can't argue with their success. Those guys are very, very successful. But I got to tell you, I think there's a chunk of America that is hungry and thirsty for clear, unequivocating truth. Okay, so the topic here for this particular program was how the Ukraine and the issues in it and the rise of China as it's building up militarily and challenging the United States in the Pacific might actually be the saving grace of America. And if you recall in our last segment, and if you missed it, you can go back on YouTube and you can find it, or you can go back in the Spreaker application, the podcast, and you can catch it there. Originally, when we were talking about that last segment, it was how, under a critical thinking exercise, to place ourselves in a position of the Ukrainians and having a government that was not representing us, and we replaced that leadership, and how we can do that within the confines and the structures of our own constitution and our own moral and ethical standards and codes and religious and convictions and what have you. Now I'm going to take it and I'm going to turn it around a little bit. And I want you to take this opportunity to put a whole different viewpoint to it and think to yourself, okay, in this instance, how is it that all of the roiling that's going on globally with all these political governments and traditional enemies like Russia and China, and make no mistake about it, folks, they are enemies, and they have been all along. Anyone who labeled them anything other than that was just trying to mislead you. But how can we look at that and expect that that may actually be beneficial to America? And I'm not suggesting that it will be. I'm only pointing out that they're... Well, let me point it out first, and then you tell me whether or not you think I'm completely off the mark, or I've drunk my own Kool-Aid, or, I don't smoke pot, so you can't accuse me of that, but you get the idea. Our government, over the course of the past, decade, and more, actually, but since 9/11, they've been at it in a whole new, with a whole new resurgence of effort, has been preparing and gearing up for a totalitarian, authoritarianistic system that most Americans don't even see coming. I think anyone who looks at the information that's out there objectively recognizes that we now live in a police state that is beginning to look more and more fascistic by the moment. And I don't mean by the day. I mean by the moment. Our government has been compiling and building resources by injecting men and training and material into our National Guards, our local community police forces, our sheriff's departments around the country, staging, if you will, that men and material concept to have access to caches of training, skills, weaponry, equipment in local communities, under the concept that as this thing comes apart, if it unravels, they have a built-in, small but localized security force that can engage their agenda. I think anyone who looks at what's happening in America today and doesn't see that to a certain extent, and I'm not saying you got to jump wholeheartedly into the conspiracy tunnel. I'm just telling you that if you look at that and you don't see that and you can't see any aspect of that, then I don't believe you're being objective and I don't believe you're being intellectually honest. Our law enforcement in this nation has become epidemic in their and systemic in their abuse of the Bill of Rights privileges that belong to Americans. I point you to literally tens of thousands of examples that are out there on YouTube. I mean, we're talking about empirical video that shows police officers engaging in behavior that 20 years ago would never have been accepted and is now routinely looked upon and said, oh, there's just another case. The courts are unwilling to do anything about it. The departments they work for have, for all intents and purposes, trained them and now condone the behavior and cover it up by saying, well, that officer was in fear of his life or in fear of... I mean, come on. A case the other day, they pulled an old guy over, told him to get out of the truck. The guy got out of the truck and reached over the back of the bed so that he could pick up his cane. And as soon as he appeared with the cane, the cop pulled his gun and said, I'm in fear of my life. Pow, pow, pow. Come on. I mean, if the guy's crippled up enough that he needs his cane to walk, maybe you ought to just hang on a moment. Really. The truth is, law enforcement in this country will tell us that law enforcement is a very dangerous job. And in certain aspects, I believe that it is. But the truth and the facts don't bear out the argument they're making. It is not as dangerous as they would like it to be, or like you to believe it is. The truth of the matter is, there are far more dangerous occupations that have absolutely nothing to do with law enforcement. And I'm not talking about military. I mean, I'm just talking about blue-collar stuff, you know? The reality is that they have convinced themselves that it's us versus them. And now they're living that. As our nation draws the resources, and I talk about resources being your income earning ability and any, money that you and money and values that you have. And I mean values as in monetary values. Forget your personal values. We're just talking here about the giant sucking sound that is happening across the nation of the resources of everyday Americans. In the lower middle, the middle, and the upper middle class. Okay? This is the complete and utter destruction of the middle class, so that what we end up with is one class, or caste, as I like to call them, who is essentially the unwashed masses and the peasantry, and an upper echelon caste, which is made up of two aspects. One, the ultra-rich, and 2, the political class itself, who live amongst enormous privilege and enormous wealth. All of it leached off and siphoned off from the American population. Don't deny it's happening, because you can look around you and see it everywhere you go. We went from 17 million people on food stamps in 5 years to 50 million people. Ladies and gentlemen, a 4-fold increase from $17 to $80 billion a year. Don't try and tell me that there are not people who are really suffering in this country. That giant sponge sucking the blood, the lifeblood, the resources out of America is not really at work. But after all of this is said and done, how is it that activities in the Ukraine and Russia and China can actually benefit America? Well, I'm going to throw a unique and novel concept at you. One, it will take government's focus off of flailing us into submission because they've got to work against guys like Putin and that idiot over in North Korea and China. In other words, if government's attention is distracted away from the continuous beatings of us, at least we get some relief. Secondly, it allows Americans to continue to try to prepare for what I believe will be a significant deprivation of all of your basic fundamental Bill of Rights as we move forward down the road. Why do you need more time to prepare? Well, because for the same reason that this giant sucking sound is drawing the resources away from the country, that reduces the amount of resources that you have to prepare and store food and get yourself trained and physically prepared and have the capability and the wherewithal to sustain for you and your family. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I have no doubt in my mind that there will come a time in this nation where you will have to have the wherewithal to survive for at least a couple of months under a complete loss of control. And I'm talking about a loss of control that the government cannot contain, whether it's natural or it's man-made or a combination of the two, whether it's an economic implosion or the crash of the dollar or whatever, it makes no difference. The truth of the matter is that will happen here in the United States again. The question is, will you and your family be prepared for it? This gives you more time to do that. Third, as a result of what's happening over there in Ukraine right now, Russia's value of the ruble has fallen precipitously against the dollar. So the dollar is on the rise against the ruble. That's hurting Russia and helping the United States. So your dollar is worth somewhat more, not much more, but a little incrementally more. And so, and China and Russia from the perspective of what their currencies mean globally, remember that they're both members of the BRICS countries, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now Australia, and Japan is talking about joining. They're trying to create an alternative currency that is a rival to the reserve dollar, the reserve currency of the world, which is the U.S. dollar. If they're successful in that, it will be the destruction of the U.S. dollar. If the ruble is falling in value, it doesn't have so much power to assist the other BRICS countries. China, while they're building up militarily and are placing themselves in a position of ever-increasing strident aggressiveness against the United States, is in a position where they're actually injuring their own currency. Why? Well, because when you attack the country that basically, for all intents and purposes, has a $300 billion bleeding valve straight into your mouth, you can't be the fat vampire forever if they shut off the flow. In other words, America loses $300 billion a year to China in trade deficit. As China's aggressiveness gets greater and greater and greater, you're going to see that number dwindle. To our benefit, their loss. In addition to that, China already has their own internal problems from their own upset and outraged civilians who are unhappy with totalitarian government in their own country and the oppression that goes on every day. How many of you heard about the terrible tragedy that occurred there the other day when 32 or 33 people or something were stabbed to death and over 100 wounded? And here we have these nincompoops in Washington trying to limit firearms, and you had 10 people get together as a collective terroristic group, and they went in there and they killed 32 people with knives while injuring over 100 others. Only 5 of them were killed and captured. The other 5 are still at large. You've got to be kidding me. And you're worried about semi-automatic assault weapons? Hey, got to tell you, if I'm going to die at the hands of violence, I would much rather it be a bullet than a knife cut. Not for nothing. I mean, man, I tell you what, knife's a tough way to go. My point is this. If the United States is distracted from beating its own people to submission, and it's focused on these external threats of Russia and China, and in their effort to push back against the United States, Russia and China are essentially slowly but surely injuring their own positions, committing a slow suicide that benefits you and I. Gives us an opportunity to allow the pendulum, and if you recall in an earlier episode, I talked about how the pendulum has begun for the first time in decades now to swing the other way. And it allows a little bit more time for the pendulum to swing the other way. It allows Americans who are on the fence or unaware or are middle of the road and don't take a political stance one way or the other until the abuse is so egregious even they can't deny it, an opportunity to become awake and participate in their own destiny. You know, Pericles made the statement that just because you ignore politics doesn't mean politics is ignoring you. And, I mean, I can't advocate that be a philosophy that you live by strongly enough. You can sit there and say, I don't listen to politics, it just makes me mad. Well, the policies that these people who are putting together because you're not involved are actually what's making you mad. Different perspective, isn't it? What's really making you mad is not politics. It's the people in place who are putting the policies in motion that are injuring you. So refusing to participate in the political game, if you will, is refusing to solve a problem that, quite frankly, is affecting your destiny. Your ability to live and thrive. Your ability to succeed. Your ability to protect and defend and preserve and encourage and enrich your own life and your family. Hey. Talk about a self-defeating principle, right? I mean, here you are saying, I don't want to get involved in politics because, I don't like it, and blah, 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 blah. They're all liars. Okay, well, you can continue to do that, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to continue to happen, and the more you ignore them, the more aggressive they get. And eventually, they're going to get around to you. As our republic descends further and further and further over the cliff of authoritarianism, we are not, as a collective group, prepared with a critical mass of Americans who are aware and awake enough for us to restore the nation. There's too many sitting out there who say, I don't pay any attention to politics. Or, I'm on the fence. I can't really decide whether... I don't know what to do. I'm only one person. Everything's going great. You hear all these different refrains. Yeah, something's wrong, but I can't quite figure it out. Have you looked? While Obama and the knuckle-dragging nincompoops in Washington, D.C. are scrambling around trying to figure out what to do about Putin and China and Russia, we get a breather. We get a little bit more time to plan and consolidate our forces and awaken and raise up those who are our allies and aren't yet aware of it. How can the Ukrainian situation help save America? How can the rise of China help save America? It buys us time. And it gives us an opportunity to use that information to help awaken those around us. What better opportunity than our last segment of critical thinking and an exercise on the Ukrainian issue than to couch that to someone who's on the fence and say, now, put yourself in this position. Do a little bit of thinking about it without the television on and your cell phone ringing and all the distractions going on in your world, and just think about this for a minute. How does it change things? How would we react? How can we? How should we react? Time is a precious thing. And in this instance, every patriot should be on board to do what they can and utilize that time as effectively as possible. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how all of this tumult and turmoil can benefit us. We're going to wrap for the day. Today is Tuesday. Appreciate you riding with us today. We'll be back tomorrow morning, bright and early. We'll try to keep you awake and aware about what's going on in the world. Tomorrow, there's another Obamacare delay. We're going to probably talk about that. There's stuff out there happening every day that, frankly, is like trying to drink out of a fire hose. It's hard for me to cover it all. But this is another abuse of the law by Obamacare doing another unilateral delay. So we've got to make sure that we're on top of that. Hey, we'll be back tomorrow morning. Have a great day. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans, and I'm your host here daily. If you have an opportunity to, I'd love for you to be able to support and help some of our sponsors out. Please make sure that you see the folks over at Wits End Classic Barbershop at 417-372-2027 and Patriot Cigar and Tobacco on the square, both of them together, at 417-257-1776. The law offices of Jason Henry at 256-4100. 417-256-4100. The law offices of Jason Henry. Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. And today's the day for reduced price lunch. And tonight is Kids Eat Free. It's family night. Please swing in there anytime for the buffet that they have. Our friends over at Battery Station at batterystation.com, 257-7799. That's 417-257-7799. And last but not least, our friends over at Express Mini Marts 1 and 2. You can find them on 14 and 63 and across the street from People's Park on Porter Wagoner Boulevard in town. And make sure that you patronize those folks. Hit the drive-thru at either one of those Mini Mart locations and let them know that you heard about them here on America's Voice Now. Communicate with me. Send me an email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.